All women feared his dark secret, until she dared to carry it beside him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories filled with emotion and hope. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. Under the soft amber light of his workshop, surrounded by walls lined with handcrafted guitars, Caleb Morgan sat in silence. The air was thick with the scent of polished mahogany and old varnish. Dust floated through the beams of light like tiny ghosts of forgotten songs. Outside, the Tennessee rain whispered against the window, a steady rhythm that filled the void where music used to live. Caleb's calloused fingers hovered over the strings of a half-finished guitar resting on his bench. He plucked one note soft, hesitant. The sound cracked and faded before it could breathe. His jaw tightened. Another failure. Another night where silence won. He exhaled slowly, the way someone exhales when they have run out of prayers. Behind him, the walls were filled with instruments he had built for others' famous singers, rising stars, collectors who never played. Every guitar was perfect, yet none of them could give him back what he had lost. On the corner shelf sat a photo, slightly burned around the edges. A younger Caleb stood beside a smiling woman in front of the old workshop. That was before the fire. Before the explosion that took his hearing in one ear and his marriage with it. The world called it an accident, but the whispers never stopped. He caused it, they said. He killed his partner. Since that day, music had become both his gift and his punishment. The fire had left a scar that no surgery could heal, a hollow silence on his right side. He could hear only half of the world, and he chose to fill the other half with work. Every morning he came to this same bench, polished the same wood, traced the same curves of the instruments he could no longer play. People called him a genius, the man who could make wood sing. But no one saw how empty the songs sounded to him. Tonight, his reflection in the workshop window stared back with eyes that looked older than 40. The storm outside rolled like distant thunder. For a brief second, he thought he could hear it on both sides, and his heart leapt until the silence returned. He stood, walked to the door, and flipped the closed sign, though the clock read only 6 p.m. His world ended early these days. Caleb turned off the main lights, leaving only the golden glow from the workbench lamp. It bathed the room in quiet melancholy, like a church with no choir. He ran his thumb along the burned edge of the photo frame and whispered under his breath, "You were right, Claire. I could not hear love anymore." Then he placed the unfinished guitar on its stand. For a moment, his hand lingered on the strings, as if begging them to respond, to fill the room, to fill him, but they remained mute. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, a man who once gave sound to the world sat surrounded by silence. And tomorrow, as always, he would wake up and build guitars for others to play, never for himself. But fate had already decided to send someone who would change that. Someone who was not afraid of the quiet or the scars or the man behind them. Someone who would dare to carry his silence beside him. The next morning arrived gray and quiet, with a faint mist still hanging over the streets of Nashville. Inside the workshop, Caleb Morgan sat at his desk, sorting through old orders that had been buried under dust and unopened envelopes. The rain from last night had left streaks on the window, catching the first light of dawn. He looked at them for a moment, the way someone studies scars, permanent reminders of something that once burned. The silence inside the shop was comforting and cruel at the same time. Caleb had grown used to it. Silence did not argue. Silence did not accuse. It was his punishment and his companion. He picked up a thin wooden brace, the kind used inside a guitar's body, and ran his thumb along the grain. It reminded him of the last words his ex-wife had said before she left. "You live for things that cannot talk back," she had said. "You would rather fix wood than fix us." That was 5 years ago. She had remarried since then. Caleb had only the workshop and his craft, both of which never demanded anything from him except perfection. On the radio, faint country music played soft and distant. He reached for the dial and turned it off. He could not bear to listen. Somewhere between the melody and the static, he could almost hear a familiar voice calling his name, and he hated that. Later that afternoon, his assistant brought in the day's mail and an envelope marked "Property Insurance Settlement, Final Notice." Caleb did not open it. The fire investigation had been closed years ago, But every time the name Morgan Workshop Fire appeared in print, something inside him tightened. The city might have moved on. He had not. He walked to the back of the shop, past shelves of finished guitars waiting for shipment. Each one had a name written in chalk: Lawson, Petty, Emerson, musicians, stars. People who played on brightly lit stages while he remained in the shadows, making their instruments sing. He was proud of his work, but sometimes pride felt like a cheap replacement for joy. That evening, a local television channel aired a rerun of an old music award show. The sound of applause drifted faintly through the workshop walls. Caleb paused by the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. On the screen, his former business partner appeared for a moment, young, alive, smiling. The caption read, "In memory of Daniel Ward." Caleb stood there motionless, the air in his lungs suddenly heavy. The fire had taken Daniel's life, and though every report had cleared Caleb of wrongdoing, guilt never needed proof. It lived in his chest, constant and invisible. The nightmare still came, the crackle of fire, Daniel's voice shouting, the explosion that followed, and the ringing silence after. That was the moment the world went half quiet forever. He sat down at his workbench and opened an old sketchbook filled with measurements and sound notes from years ago. Between the pages, he found a burned guitar pick, the last one Daniel had used. Caleb held it between his fingers, rough edges biting into his skin. "I should have been faster," he murmured, his voice almost breaking. Outside, thunder rumbled again, echoing through the hills. He turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the blinds. The workshop returned to its sacred stillness, and yet, as he closed his eyes, he felt something stirring, a faint unease, like the world was holding its breath for something new. He did not know that tomorrow the sound of a young woman's footsteps would cross the wooden floor of this very shop. He did not know that her voice, light and unafraid, would soon fill this silence he had lived with for years. But for now, Caleb only sat there, listening to the hum of his broken hearing aid, the low buzz that never left his right ear. It was the sound of his private prison, the price of surviving the fire. He took a deep breath, reached for his tools again, and whispered to himself, "Work does not ask questions. Work does not leave." The rain began again, steady and gentle, washing the streets outside. The city lights shimmered in the puddles. Nashville moved on, unaware that inside one small workshop a man was still learning how to breathe in the quiet. Tomorrow would come with a knock on the door and a pair of brown boots stepping over the threshold. Tomorrow, someone would dare to ask him to bring music back to life. And for the first time in years, silence would have to make room for a song. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, painting narrow lines of gold across the workshop floor. The smell of sawdust and lemon oil hung in the air. Caleb Morgan sat at his workbench, tightening the last string of a custom guitar ordered by a country artist from Texas. He tested the pitch with a small electronic tuner, nodded once, and set the instrument gently in its case. It was beautiful, flawless, and lifeless like every guitar he had built since the fire. He sipped cold coffee from a mug chipped at the rim. On the wall, an old clock ticked with an unhurried rhythm, one he had grown too used to. Time moved forward, but his life stayed still. Then came a sound that did not belong there, a quick knock at the door. 3 light taps, uncertain but determined. Caleb frowned. He rarely had visitors without an appointment. He opened the door halfway. Outside stood a young woman, no more than 21, her hair damp from the morning drizzle. A guitar case hung from her shoulder, old and scratched, the handle wrapped with duct tape. She looked nervous but hopeful. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said softly. "I hope I am not interrupting." Caleb hesitated. Few people called him Mr. Morgan. Most called him the guitar maker, as if his name had vanished with the smoke of the fire. "I heard you are the only one who can fix something like this." She opened the case carefully, revealing a guitar that had seen better days. The wood was cracked, the strings corroded, and one tuning peg hung loose like a broken tooth. Yet beneath the wear and tear was something familiar, the curve of a model Caleb had designed more than a decade ago. He stepped closer, drawn by instinct. His fingertips traced the faint stamp on the soundboard. Morgan Workshop Series 1, 2010. His breath caught. This was one of the first instruments he had ever sold under his own name. "Where did you get this?" His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "It belonged to my father," the young woman said. "He passed away last winter. This was his favorite guitar. I have been trying to play it, but it sounds broken. I want it to sing again." Caleb looked at her hands, small, with calluses forming on the fingertips. She was a musician, even if she did not look like one yet. He cleared his throat. It is old. The neck is warped. The bridge might need replacement. It will take time. That is fine, she said quickly. I am not in a hurry. He studied her for a moment. Most clients cared about value or brand. She cared about sound, about memory. Something in that sincerity unsettled him. What is your name? Haley Brooks. The name hung in the air like a soft note. Caleb nodded once, reluctantly. Leave it here. I will see what I can do. Haley smiled, a little unsure, but her eyes brightened. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. My father used to say a guitar is just a heart made of wood. I think he would want you to be the one to fix it. When she left, the door clicked softly behind her, and for a long time, Caleb stood staring at the guitar on his bench. The rain had started again, tapping gently on the roof. He ran his fingers over the crack along the body, tracing the damage like a doctor feeling for a pulse. He remembered her words, a heart made of wood. That evening, he removed the old strings and inspected the bridge. It was worse than he expected. The wood was splintered deep, the kind of wound that required patience and precision. As he worked, he found himself humming under his breath, an old tune that he had not allowed to surface in years. The melody came from somewhere buried, something Daniel used to play before the fire. He stopped abruptly, shaken. His hand trembled, the file slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. He leaned back, pressing his palms against his temples. The room seemed to close in. That girl's voice, her calm brown eyes, the way she talked about her father, it all stirred something dangerous. Remembrance. He pushed the chair away and walked to the window. Outside, the rain glistened on the street, reflecting the neon sign of a small diner across the road. Inside, people laughed, clinking coffee cups and silverware. Ordinary life. It felt a world away from him. On the workbench, Haley's guitar sat open, its strings removed, its body exposed, vulnerable. Caleb looked at it and saw himself broken, waiting for someone to make him whole again. He shook his head quickly, dismissing the thought. Work was work, nothing more. He turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the bench lamp. The golden light touched the cracked wood, and for a moment, it looked alive again. Caleb whispered quietly to the empty room. Let us see if you can still sing, old friend. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the workshop breathed again. Caleb did not know it yet, but the girl with the brown eyes would be back tomorrow. And with her would come questions, laughter, and a song that might finally break the silence he had lived in for 5 long years. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the dusty windows of the workshop, turning every floating speck into gold. Caleb Morgan stood at his bench, his sleeves rolled up, the faint smell of glue and cedar rising from the open guitar body before him. He had worked late into the night on Haley Brooks's instrument, carefully cleaning, sanding, and realigning the warped neck. The process was delicate, almost surgical. For the first time in years, his hands felt alive again. He was adjusting the clamps when the front door creaked open. A soft voice followed. Mr. Morgan? Haley stood there in a denim jacket 2 sizes too big, holding a paper bag that smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. She smiled shyly. I thought you might forget breakfast. You look like the kind of man who does. Caleb blinked, caught off guard. I usually do, he said quietly. Well, then I guessed right. She placed the bag on the counter. I wanted to check on the guitar and maybe learn a little about what you are doing to it. He hesitated. Most clients never cared about the process. They only cared about the result. It is a complicated repair, he said. Not something people find very interesting. I do, she replied, stepping closer. My dad used to say music begins long before the first note. It starts with hands like yours. The words hit him deeper than she knew. Caleb looked down, avoiding her eyes. He sounds like he loved his music. He did, she said softly. He used to play every night after dinner. I would sit by the porch and make up lyrics to whatever he was playing. I never wrote them down. Now I wish I had. Caleb glanced up at her then, and for a moment the workshop did not feel as empty. He cleared his throat. The crack was worse than I expected, he said, changing the subject. It will take a few days, maybe longer. That is fine. I just wanted to see it. He nodded, but she was already moving closer to the workbench, her eyes scanning every detail like a student eager to learn. So that is spruce on top, right? My father used to say spruce gives the sound a kind of brightness. Caleb arched an eyebrow. Most people do not know that. She grinned. "I am not most people." Against his better judgment, he felt the corner of his mouth lift. It was the first genuine smile in a long time. For the next hour, Haley asked about every step, how he chose the wood, how he could tell the tone from a tap of his knuckle, why he sometimes closed his eyes while working. He answered in short sentences at first, but her curiosity was contagious. He found himself explaining things he had not spoken of since the fire, the difference between resonance and echo, how each instrument carried its own soul, how silence itself could shape the music. When she laughed, the sound filled the room in a way no radio ever had. At one point, she asked, "Do you still play, Mr. Morgan?" He froze, his hands tightening around the chisel. "No," he said after a long pause, "not anymore." "Why not?" she asked gently. "Because some things are meant to be left quiet," he said. She nodded, sensing the wall he had built around himself. "Maybe. But even silence has a rhythm." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the shop grew dim, Caleb sat alone again. The guitar was clamped and curing, the smell of fresh varnish thick around him. He should have gone home, but her voice replayed in his head. Even silence has a rhythm. He reached for an unfinished guitar resting on the rack. The body gleamed under the lamplight. Slowly, almost afraid, he plucked a string. The sound was faint but warm. He plucked another, then another, until a melody stumbled out, broken but real. Halfway through, he stopped, startled by the faint vibration on the table. Haley had left her phone charger behind, and it was buzzing with an incoming call. He picked it up, meaning to silence it, but the name flashing across the screen caught his eye. Mom. He froze. Somewhere deep in his chest, an ache stirred memories of family, of normal mornings that were now unreachable. He set the phone down and whispered into the empty shop, "You should not care, Caleb." But his voice betrayed him. That night, for the first time in years, he dreamed not of fire or loss, but of a girl humming by a porch, and a man building a guitar that could finally sing again. The next morning Haley returned. She looked different in the daylight, confident, determined. "I brought something," she said, pulling a small notebook from her backpack. "These are lyrics I wrote after my dad passed. They do not have a melody yet. Maybe once the guitar is ready, we can find one together." Caleb wanted to say no, to remind her he was only a craftsman, not a musician anymore. But something in her tone, the way she said together, made it impossible to refuse. He simply nodded and said, "Leave the notebook. I will take care of the rest." She smiled, and before she left, she turned back toward him. "You know, Mr. Morgan, I think you still hear more than you believe." When the door closed behind her, Caleb stood there motionless, her words echoing inside his half-silent world. He touched his ear, the one that could no longer hear clearly, and for a moment he thought he could sense something faint, like a heartbeat in wood. Maybe, just maybe, silence was not the enemy after all. For the next few days, Haley Brooks became a regular part of the workshop. Every morning, the small bell above the door chimed, and her voice followed with an easy, "Good morning, Mr. Morgan." She always brought coffee, sometimes blueberry muffins, sometimes just her bright energy that seemed to spill into every quiet corner. Caleb Morgan pretended not to notice how the silence changed when she arrived. He told himself she was just another client, but the truth was different. Her presence broke something in the air, a stillness that had weighed on him for years. One Thursday morning, she walked in humming a tune he did not recognize. She leaned against the counter, eyes wandering around the room. "It smells like cedar and coffee in here," she said. "If peace had a scent, that would be it." Caleb glanced up from his work. "Most people say it smells like varnish and glue." "Then they are not paying attention," she said, smiling. She sat near his bench, pulling out her small notebook. "Do you mind if I stay a while? The apartment gets too quiet." He hesitated, then nodded. "As long as you do not touch anything that can cut your hand off." "Deal," she said with a grin. While he sanded the guitar body, she began to write. Every now and then, she would hum a line, test a phrase, erase it, and start again. The rhythm of her pencil matched the soft rasp of his sandpaper. Two different kinds of music blending in the same room. After a while, she asked without looking up, "Do you believe people can be broken and still make something beautiful?" Caleb paused. "I suppose that is what music is. Broken notes that somehow fit together." She nodded thoughtfully, writing that sentence down. When he finally finished the sanding, she stood beside him, watching as he brushed the sawdust from the body of the guitar. "It looks alive again," she whispered. He looked at her, then at the instrument. "Not yet. It still needs a voice." Maybe that is my part, she said softly. That night, she returned with her father's favorite record and asked if she could play it while he worked. The vinyl hissed faintly before the first chords began. It was an old country ballad, simple and honest, about losing someone and learning to live again. Caleb froze halfway through polishing. The voice on the record reminded him of Daniel, warm, imperfect, human. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to keep working. Haley watched him closely, noticing the tension in his jaw. Was he someone you lost? She asked gently. He set the rag down and sighed. Yes, a friend, a partner. He died in the fire that ruined my hearing. People blamed me for it. She did not flinch. She just stepped closer and said quietly, "Then maybe you build guitars to apologize to him." Her words landed like a soft hammer on a fragile chord. He looked up, eyes sharp. "What makes you think you can understand?" Haley did not retreat. "Because I lost someone too, my dad. And for a long time I tried to make peace by writing songs that no one heard." The room went still. Then, without warning, she began to hum. It was not a full melody, just a thread of sound winding between them. Caleb stood motionless, listening. He could hear it clearly in his left ear, faintly in the damaged one, and for the first time the imbalance did not bother him. The sound was pure, gentle, alive. When she finished, she said softly, "You see? Music does not always need to be perfect, it just needs to be true." Something cracked open in him then. He turned away, afraid she might see the emotion on his face. "You should go," he said quietly. "It is late." Haley nodded. "I will come by tomorrow. We can keep working on the voice." After she left, Caleb stood alone in the dim workshop. Her humming still echoed in the air. He looked down at the repaired guitar and whispered, "She is trouble." But there was no anger in his tone, only something that sounded suspiciously like hope. Later that night, unable to sleep, he sat at the bench again. He reached for his old notebook, the one filled with sketches from before the fire, and turned to a page that had been left blank. Slowly, he began to draw new measurements, small notes, details for something different, a new design, one he had not dared to attempt in years. At the top of the page, he wrote a single word, Haley. The next morning, she returned as promised, her hair still damp from the rain. "Morning," she said cheerfully. "I brought new strings. Thought maybe we could restring the guitar together." He wanted to refuse, to keep distance. But when she smiled, the word no disappeared before reaching his lips. Together, they attached the new strings, tightening them slowly, listening as each one came to life. Haley's hand brushed his as she tuned the last string. He felt the warmth of her fingers, the steady rhythm of her breathing. When she looked up, their eyes met. For the first time in 5 years, Caleb realized that silence was no longer his only companion. It had been replaced by something far more dangerous and far more alive. Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, the workshop held its breath. The man who once built guitars for others to play was beginning to hear again. Saturday came with a sky the color of silver and quiet air that carried the promise of rain. Inside the workshop, Caleb Morgan was already at his bench, working on Haley's guitar with a precision that bordered on obsession. The instrument had almost recovered. The wood glowed with a faint sheen, the neck perfectly aligned. Yet something still felt unfinished, as if the guitar waited for more than repairs, it waited for permission to live again. The bell above the door jingled, and Haley Brooks stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her smile was easy, her voice bright. "I figured you would not take a break unless I forced you." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and gave a small nod. "You figured right." She handed him a cup and walked around the shop, her eyes tracing the instruments hanging on the walls. "You built all of these?" He nodded. "Every one of them." "They are beautiful," she said softly. "It must feel incredible to create something that carries music into the world." He hesitated. "It used to. Now I just build what people ask for. They pay, I deliver." Haley turned to face him. "That sounds lonely." "It is simpler that way," he replied. "Simplicity keeps you from getting hurt." Her expression softened. "Maybe, but it also keeps you from getting healed." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The faint hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence between them. Then Haley opened her notebook and said, "I wrote something last night, a song. It is not finished yet, but I think it belongs to this guitar." She sat on a stool, placed the half-restored instrument across her knees, and began to sing softly. Her voice was unpolished but full of feeling. The lyrics told of a girl who carried the voice of her father in every chord, and a man who built a bridge of sound so she could cross her grief. Caleb listened, unmoving. The melody wove through the workshop like sunlight touching old wood. He felt it sink into him, warming places that had been cold for years. When she stopped, the silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred. He cleared his throat, unsure of his own voice. "That song, where did it come from?" Haley smiled faintly. "From here." She touched her chest. "And maybe a little from you." Caleb looked away, his pulse unsteady. "Do not give me credit I do not deserve." "You do," she said simply. "You gave this guitar a second chance. Maybe that means you are ready for one too." He turned back to the bench, pretending to work, but his hands trembled slightly. "You think you understand me, but you do not." She tilted her head, studying him. "Then explain it to me. Why did you stop playing?" He froze. The question hit harder than she knew. For years he had buried the truth under layers of guilt and routine. Now, under her gaze, the wall began to crack. "The night of the fire," he said quietly, "Daniel and I were testing a new design. Something went wrong with the wiring. The amplifier blew. The flames spread fast. I tried to pull him out, but I did not move fast enough." His voice faltered. "I can still hear the sound of the strings snapping in the fire. After that I could not play." Every note sounded like guilt. Haley set the guitar down gently and stepped closer. "You do not have to carry that alone anymore," she whispered. He shook his head, his eyes hard. "You are young. You do not understand what it means to lose everything because of one mistake." She met his gaze steadily. "No, but I understand what it means to keep punishing yourself long after life has forgiven you." Something in her tone broke through the fog inside him. He turned away, unable to speak. She reached out, resting a hand on his arm light, steady, real. For a man who had built hundreds of instruments, it was the first time in years he felt something that could not be measured. The moment stretched between them until the sound of distant thunder rolled outside. Haley stepped back and smiled faintly. "Storm's coming," she said. "Maybe that is a good thing. Storms wash things clean." When she left, Caleb remained standing in the same spot. The workshop was quiet again, but it was no longer the same kind of quiet. Her song lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of cedar and varnish. He sat down, picked up his old guitar, the one he had sworn never to touch again, and plucked a single string. The sound trembled, uneven, fragile. He waited for the guilt to return, for the fire to replay in his mind. But this time, all he heard was her voice, soft and forgiving. "You do not have to carry that alone." He let the note fade into silence, then whispered, "Maybe storms do wash things clean." Outside, the rain began to fall. Inside, for the first time in 5 years, Caleb Morgan played another note. Sunday morning came quietly. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Nashville still glistened under the pale light. Inside his workshop, Caleb Morgan tuned a guitar for a client, yet his thoughts were not on the wood or the strings. They were on the young woman who had walked out yesterday after saying, "Storms wash things clean." The memory of her voice lingered, a melody he could not shake off. For 5 years, no one had entered his world of silence the way she did. She had turned his routine into something unpredictable, and though he hated to admit it, part of him waited for the sound of her knock. It came around noon. 3 soft taps on the door, the same rhythm as the first time. Caleb almost smiled before catching himself. Haley Brooks stepped inside, her hair windblown, cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried a notebook under her arm and a sense of purpose in her step. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan," she said brightly. "I hope you did not drown in the storm." "Not yet," he said dryly, though there was a faint warmth behind his tone. She glanced at the repaired guitar on his bench and gasped. "It looks perfect." "Not yet," he corrected, "but close." Haley ran her fingers lightly over the polished surface. "You know, when I first brought it here, I thought you would just fix it and send me away. I did not think you would well care." Caleb set his tools down. "I do not fix things I do not care about." She smiled. "Then maybe that is why people trust you." He wanted to tell her that trust was a word that had burned up with the fire years ago, but instead, he said nothing. Haley flipped open her notebook. "I wrote something new. Do you mind if I read it?" "Go ahead." She began to read softly, the verses trembling just a little. The lyrics told of 2 souls, one who had forgotten how to listen, and one who refused to stop singing. The words painted images of rain-soaked nights and unfinished songs. When she finished, silence filled the room again. Caleb exhaled slowly. "That is good. he said. Better than good. Then maybe we can make it better together, she replied. You could help me shape the melody. He froze. Haley, I have not played in years. Then start small, one chord, just to see if it fits. Her eyes met his, steady and sure. Something inside him, some part that had been locked behind guilt, moved slightly. Against his own logic, he reached for the nearest guitar. His fingers hovered over the strings as if testing whether they would still obey him. He played one chord, then another. The sound was uneven, imperfect, but alive. Haley's face lit up. There! That is it. That is the start. He shook his head. I am out of practice. That is fine. You are not supposed to be perfect. You are supposed to feel. Her voice was soft but certain. Caleb found himself watching her instead of the guitar. Every word she said carried that reckless honesty of someone too young to know fear and too kind to care. When the last note faded, Haley spoke again. You do not have to carry the fire anymore. You survived it. Maybe now it is time to make something from the ashes. Her words struck deep. He looked down at his hands, scarred yet steady, and whispered, maybe. She left shortly after, promising to bring fresh strings the next day. As the door closed behind her, Caleb felt the strange ache of someone leaving and taking the light with them. That night he sat in the quiet workshop long after dark. He opened his drawer and took out a worn photograph, Daniel's smile frozen in time beside his own. Caleb studied it for a long time before speaking aloud to the empty room. You would have liked her, Danny. She has that same stubborn way of believing broken things can still sing. A faint smile touched his lips. He set the photo beside the guitar Haley had brought and whispered, maybe it is time I start believing it too. The wind outside rustled the sign hanging over the door, the faint squeak blending with the hum of the night. For the first time in years, Caleb did not turn off the light before leaving. He wanted the workshop to stay warm, as if waiting for her return. The next morning would bring more than Haley's song. It would bring questions from others, people who remembered the fire, people who had not forgiven. But for now, in the golden quiet of his shop, a man who had lived in silence finally allowed himself to listen again. Monday morning broke with a gray sky and a thin fog hanging low over the streets of Nashville. The workshop lights were already on when Haley Brooks arrived, her boots echoing softly against the wet pavement. Inside, Caleb Morgan stood at the bench, his back straight, his eyes focused on the guitar that had once belonged to her father. It was finished. The surface gleamed under the lamplight, smooth and golden, like a piece of sunlight trapped in wood. Haley stopped at the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. It is beautiful, she said quietly. Caleb turned, his expression unreadable. It is ready, he said, but you should let it rest for a day or two before tuning it fully. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the strings. The guitar gave a faint hum in response. It feels alive again. It should, he replied. I rebuilt it from the inside out. Haley smiled. Maybe we both did. He looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. There is still one thing left, he said. I need to test the sound myself before I give it back. She tilted her head. You mean play it? He nodded once, just enough to make sure it is right. She hesitated, sensing the wall he was trying to rebuild between them. All right, she said softly. I will wait outside. But when she turned toward the door, he said quietly, stay. She froze, then faced him again. He sat down on the worn stool, the guitar balanced across his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the tuning pegs. The moment stretched long and fragile, filled with the sound of the rain beginning again outside. He strummed once hesitant, uneven. The note quivered in the air like something uncertain of its own strength. He tried again, this time slower. The sound grew warmer, clearer. Haley stood still, afraid to breathe too loudly. Caleb closed his eyes. The melody that came next was one Daniel used to play late at night, the one that had ended halfway the night of the fire. His fingers moved on instinct, remembering what his heart had buried. When the final note faded, he opened his eyes. Haley's eyes were wet. It is perfect, she whispered. He shook his head. It is not about perfect, he said. It is about finally being able to hear it again. She smiled through her tears. You did more than fix a guitar, Mr. Morgan. You fixed something in yourself. Before he could answer, the bell above the door rang again. A man in a dark coat stepped inside, carrying a clipboard. Caleb Morgan? He asked briskly. From the Fire Safety Review Board. Caleb stiffened. Yes. I need to confirm your attendance at the hearing tomorrow morning, the man said. There has been a petition to reopen the investigation into the Morgan workshop fire. Haley's eyes widened. What? After all these years? The inspector nodded. New evidence has surfaced. You will receive official notice this afternoon. When the man left, the silence in the room felt heavier than before. Caleb sat motionless, his jaw tightening. Is that serious? Haley asked carefully. It could be, he said. If they reopen the case, everything I rebuilt could fall apart again. But you did not cause that fire, she said firmly. It does not matter, he replied. People will believe what they want. They always have. Haley took a step closer. Then fight it. Let them see the truth. He looked at her, his eyes tired. You are young, Haley. You still believe truth is enough. She crossed her arms. And you do not? He sighed. Not after what happened. I lost my partner. I lost my name. I lost my hearing. The only thing left was silence, and even that did not belong to me. Haley moved closer until she was standing right beside him. Then let me stand with you this time, she said softly. You do not have to face this alone. Her voice carried a calm strength that reminded him of the storm she had mentioned before, the kind that does not destroy but cleans. He wanted to tell her no, to protect her from the mess his life was about to become. But instead, he found himself saying, You should not get involved. She smiled faintly. Too late for that. The next morning, the hearing would bring cameras, reporters, and questions he had avoided for 5 years. Yet for the first time, Caleb Morgan did not feel like a man waiting for judgment. He felt like someone who had already survived the worst of it. When Haley left that day, she turned at the door and said, Play that melody again tonight, the one Daniel taught you. Let it remind you what kind of man you really are. After she was gone, Caleb picked up the guitar and sat alone in the golden light. The room smelled of cedar, rain, and something new hope, fragile but real. He played the melody again, each note falling like raindrops. And though the past was coming back to test him, he realized that he was not the same man who had once lived only in silence. He had found his sound again. And this time, he was not playing alone. The next day began under a sharp blue sky, but inside the courthouse, the air was heavy. Caleb Morgan stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the polished floor. The faint hum of fluorescent lights reminded him of the old workshop before the fire, steady, cold, and relentless. He had been through trials before, but this one felt different. It was not just about the past anymore. It was about what he had finally started to rebuild. Haley Brooks was there too, sitting a few feet away, holding a small notebook on her lap. She had insisted on coming even after he told her not to. Now, watching him from the corner of her eye, she saw a man who carried the weight of both guilt and dignity. He looked calm, but she could feel the tension in the air around him. When they called his name, Caleb rose slowly and walked into the chamber. The smell of paper and coffee hit him first, followed by the soft murmur of reporters. The hearing was not public, but somehow, the press always found a way in when the word Morgan Fire appeared. At the center table sat the review board, a panel of 3 officials. One of them, an older man with silver hair, adjusted his glasses and said, Mr. Morgan, thank you for coming. As you are aware, new documents have surfaced regarding the 2018 incident at your workshop. A witness has come forward with a statement. Caleb said nothing. His throat felt dry. The board continued, reading from a report. The witness claims that faulty electrical installation, not human error, caused the ignition. The wiring used in the amplifier model tested that night was defective. Do you confirm this could be possible? Caleb exhaled slowly. Yes, he said. It was a new component we were testing. Daniel and I both approved it. If it failed, then I failed with it. The man nodded. The report absolves you of negligence. However, public speculation remains unresolved. We suggest you release a statement to close the case once and for all. Caleb hesitated. I do not care about speculation. I only care about truth. The woman on the panel looked at him kindly. Then let the world hear it from you, Mr. Morgan. After the session ended, reporters swarmed outside. Cameras flashed, questions flew. Mr. Morgan, is it true you caused the fire? Do you take responsibility for your partner's death? Will you continue building guitars? He stood frozen for a moment, the noise crashing around him. Then a familiar voice cut through it all. He already did take responsibility, Haley said firmly. He took it every day he kept living, building, creating beauty from loss. Maybe you should write that down." The crowd turned toward her, surprised by the young woman's courage. Caleb looked at her, a mix of shock and quiet pride softening his face. They left together, walking into the cold afternoon. The wind tugged at Haley's hair, but she did not seem to notice. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I could not just stand there." He gave a small smile. "You should not have had to." Back at the workshop, the tension of the day slowly melted into the smell of cedar and polish. Caleb hung his jacket on the hook and sat at his bench. Haley leaned against the counter, watching him. "You know," she said gently, "the story people tell about you will change now." "Maybe," he said. "But even if it does not, I am still here. That is enough." She nodded, opening her notebook. "Then we finish our song." He looked at her with a faint smirk. "You never stop, do you?" "Not when it matters," she said. They worked late into the evening, piecing together melodies and lyrics. The words came easier this time, free of shadows. Caleb played while she sang, their rhythms imperfect but real. Every sound filled the air like a confession being forgiven in slow motion. When they finished, Haley sat quietly for a moment. "What will you do now that the case is closed?" Caleb looked at the guitar in his hands, the instrument that had started it all. "I think I will build again, not just for others. Maybe for myself this time." Haley smiled. "Then maybe it is time we let the world hear what you sound like." He shook his head gently, but his eyes softened. "Maybe it is time we let us be heard." Outside, the lights of Nashville shimmered against the night sky. For the first time, Caleb Morgan did not see the city as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a place still alive with the promise of new beginnings. Later that night, when Haley left, he stayed behind for a while, replaying her laughter in his mind. The sound mixed with the soft ringing of guitar strings still vibrating on the bench. Tomorrow, the news would spread that Caleb Morgan had been cleared of guilt. But in this quiet hour, surrounded by the scent of wood and hope, that truth already felt old. The real story was not about clearing his name. It was about finding his voice again and realizing that somewhere along the way, a young songwriter had become the rhythm to his silence. That night, Nashville was quiet except for the distant hum of streetlights and the occasional echo of a passing car. Inside the workshop, the clock ticked past midnight. Caleb Morgan sat by the open window, guitar in hand, the night breeze carrying the faint scent of rain and magnolia. His hearing aid buzzed softly in the background, a reminder of what he had lost and of how far he had come since then. The fire, the years of silence, the accusations, all of it felt like another lifetime. Now, for the first time, the silence inside him was not heavy. It was peaceful. He plucked a slow chord, then another, and the sound filled the room like a whisper of forgiveness. On the bench beside him sat Haley's notebook. She had forgotten it again, though he suspected she left it on purpose. The pages were filled with handwritten lyrics and sketches of songs they had worked on together. The latest one was titled "Carry It Beside Me." Caleb ran his hand across the cover. The phrase stayed in his head, looping quietly, almost like a prayer. The next morning, the news spread across local media. Morgan fire case closed, no negligence found. Reporters called it redemption, but Caleb did not think of it that way. Redemption implies you went looking for forgiveness. He had not. It had simply found him when he least expected it, in the form of a girl with a cracked guitar and a heart full of music. Haley arrived later that morning, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the same determined smile that had first walked into his life. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said lightly. "Or should I say, the most talked-about man in Nashville today." He chuckled quietly. "Please do not remind me." She set the coffee on the counter. "I figured you would not celebrate, so I brought caffeine instead of champagne." "Smart choice," he said. Haley looked around the workshop, her eyes landing on her father's restored guitar hanging proudly on the wall. "It is strange," she said softly. "I thought this place would always feel haunted, but now it feels like home." Caleb followed her gaze. "That is because you brought the music back," he said. She turned to him with a small smile. "Maybe we both did." He nodded slowly. "There is one thing left I need to do." She raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" He gestured to the stool beside him. "Finish your song." Haley blinked, then smiled, understanding. She picked up the guitar, her fingers steady on the frets. Caleb grabbed another and tuned it carefully. For a moment, they just sat there, 2 people who had walked through different kinds of loss, now sharing the same rhythm. She began to play first, her voice soft and raw. All women feared his dark secret, but she dared to carry it beside him. Through fire and silence, she found the sound he thought he lost. Caleb joined her, his lower harmony blending with her melody. The notes filled the workshop, spilling into the street through the open window. People passing by slowed down, drawn by the sound. It was not flawless, not even close, but it was alive, every imperfection a part of the story. When the last note faded, Haley wiped a tear from her cheek. "We did it," she whispered. Caleb smiled faintly. "We did." She stood and hung the guitar back on the wall. "So, what happens now?" He looked around at the room, the polished wood, the tools, the memories. "Now, I build again. But this time, not for orders or fame. I will build instruments for people who need their own song." Haley nodded. "And I will write songs for those who have forgotten how to listen." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that did not need words to explain. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the dusty floorboards. Haley walked to the door, but turned back one last time. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said softly, "for fixing more than a guitar." He met her eyes, the corners of his lips curving into the faintest smile. "Thank you for reminding me that silence can heal too." She lingered for a moment, then stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the door slightly open. The wind carried in a soft tune from the street, a busker playing somewhere nearby. Caleb listened, his hearing uneven but good enough to catch the melody. He returned to his bench, picked up his old sketchbook, and wrote on a blank page, "Morgan Custom Series Rebirth." Then, at the very bottom, in small, deliberate handwriting, he added another line, "Inspired by Haley Brooks." As the day went on, the sound of his tools filled the workshop again. Steady, rhythmic, alive. Outside, life moved on. Inside, a man who had once been broken by fire was now creating something new, guided by music, memory, and a girl who dared to carry his silence beside him. For the first time in years, Caleb Morgan smiled, not because the past was gone, but because he finally learned how to live with it. 2 weeks passed. The workshop had grown busier than it had been in years. Musicians, collectors, and curious locals stopped by, not because of gossip about the old fire, but because of the song that had quietly spread across Nashville. Someone had recorded Caleb Morgan and Haley Brooks singing that night through the open window. It had gone viral online, labeled simply as "the song that healed a guitar maker." Caleb had not posted it, but he could not deny the strange peace that came from hearing it again. Every imperfection, every rough note, told the truth. It was not about fame, it was about honesty. That morning he arrived early, opening the shop before sunrise. The smell of fresh-cut wood filled the air. A half-built guitar rested on the bench beside his coffee mug, and Haley's lyrics lay open next to it. She had started visiting less often these days, traveling to perform at small venues around the city. But she still sent him messages, pictures of open mics, and recordings of her songs played with the same guitar he had repaired. As he traced a pencil line along the body of his newest design, he heard the bell above the door ring. Haley stepped in, her face bright despite the cold wind outside. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said. "I heard you are becoming famous." He smirked slightly. "Hardly. Fame does not fit me. I prefer the sound of tools to applause." She laughed and walked closer. "Well, you might not have a choice. People are asking about you everywhere. They want to know who built the healing guitar." He sighed, pretending to be annoyed, but she could see the quiet pride in his eyes. "Then you should tell them it was teamwork." Haley leaned on the counter, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. "I was thinking about something," she said. "What if we host a small performance here, in the shop? Nothing big, just a few local artists playing on your guitars. It could honor Daniel, your partner. It could also thank the community that believed in you again." Caleb hesitated. "You really think people would come?" "They already do," she said softly. "They are just waiting for you to open the door." He considered it for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But you are the one who will sing first." Haley grinned. "Deal." They spent the rest of the week preparing. Caleb cleared the front space, moved the benches to the back, and polished every instrument that hung on the walls. Haley strung fairy lights across the ceiling, the warm glow making the shop look almost magical. By Friday night, everything was ready. When the first guests arrived, the air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Musicians carried their guitars carefully, fans held cups of coffee, and neighbors filled the small room. Caleb stood near the back, his arms folded, watching as Haley stepped onto the makeshift stage. She greeted the crowd with her easy smile. "Thank you all for coming. This place was once just a workshop, she said, glancing at Caleb. But tonight, it is proof that silence can become music again. Applause rippled through the crowd. Then she lifted her guitar, the same one her father had given her, and began to play Carry It Beside Me. The melody was gentle at first, then stronger, until the entire room seemed to breathe in rhythm with her voice. Caleb felt every word. When the chorus came, Haley turned toward him and motioned for him to join. The crowd watched as the quiet man picked up a second guitar and walked to her side. He hesitated only for a heartbeat, then began to play. Their sounds blended effortlessly, his steady rhythm grounding her soaring melody. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause. Haley turned to him, her eyes shining. "Told you they would come," she whispered. He smiled, the lines on his face softening. "You were right." After the performance, people approached him with handshakes and kind words. Some thanked him for the music, others for the story. He accepted it all humbly, still a little dazed by the warmth around him. Later, when the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Haley stood beside him, looking at the now quiet shop. "It feels different," she said softly, "like the ghosts finally left." Caleb nodded. "They did not leave," he said. "They just learned to listen." She looked up at him and smiled. "And you finally learned to play for yourself." He met her gaze, and for the first time he did not look away. "Maybe I did." Outside, the night was calm. The glow from the workshop spilled out onto the street, carrying with it the faint sound of strings still humming in the air. For a man who had once been trapped in silence, Caleb Morgan now lived in a world full of sound, every note a reminder that even the broken can build something beautiful again. The next morning, the sunlight slipped through the blinds and rested softly on the guitars hanging along the wall. The air inside the workshop still carried traces of the night before: laughter, music, and the faint sweetness of coffee. Caleb Morgan stood at the counter, wiping down the last of the tables, while Haley Brooks sat cross-legged on the floor, collecting empty cups into a paper bag. Neither spoke for a while. The silence was gentle now, no longer something heavy to escape, but something alive, like a breath between chords. Finally, Haley broke the quiet. "You know, I do not think I will ever forget last night." Caleb looked over his shoulder, smiling faintly. "It was something, wasn't it?" "It was more than something," she said, standing up. "You heard it too, right? The way everyone stopped talking during the song? It was like they could feel the same thing we did." He nodded slowly. "Music has a way of doing that. It finds what words cannot say and fills the spaces between them." Haley watched him for a moment. "You sound like someone who should be teaching, not just building guitars." He chuckled. "I do not have much to teach." "Are you kidding?" she said, stepping closer. "You taught me that silence is not the end of music. You taught me that even broken things can sing again. You might not realize it, but that is a lesson people need." He said nothing for a moment, just looked around at the guitars hanging on the wall. "Maybe I am still learning that lesson myself." She tilted her head. "Then we will learn together." He smiled quietly. "You are impossible to argue with." "That is why I win," she said playfully. They shared a small laugh. Outside, the sound of distant church bells drifted through the open window. Sunday morning. The world moved on, but inside that small workshop, time seemed to slow down. Caleb reached for a small velvet-lined case on the shelf and handed it to her. "Here," he said. "Open it." Haley looked curious as she unlatched it. Inside was a guitar pick, carved from dark walnut, its edges smooth and polished. On one side, her initials were engraved. On the other, a single word, "Carry." She looked up, speechless. "You made this?" He nodded. "I started working on it after our first song together. I figured every musician needs something that reminds them where they began." Her eyes softened. "Caleb, this is beautiful. It is just wood," he said quietly. "But wood remembers the hands that shape it. Maybe that is why I chose this craft. It lets me leave something behind that keeps living." Haley closed the case carefully, holding it to her chest. "Then, I will make sure it keeps living. Every song I write from now on, I will carry this with me." He met her gaze and felt something shift in the air between them, a quiet understanding that needed no words. She glanced at the wall clock and sighed. "I should probably go. My bus to Knoxville leaves this afternoon. There is a music festival next week, and they want me to perform." Caleb's expression softened with pride. "That is good. You deserve it." "Will you come?" she asked, half teasing, half hoping. He hesitated. "Crowds and we do not always get along." Haley smiled. "Then promise me something. When I sing our song, you will be listening. wherever you are." He nodded slowly. "You have my word." She gave him one last look, her smile a mix of joy and sorrow. "You know, for someone who swore he could not hear anymore, you ended up hearing more than anyone I have ever met." Caleb's voice was steady but quiet. "That is because you taught me how." They stood there for a long moment before she stepped forward and hugged him. It was not a goodbye full of drama or tears, it was steady, warm, and real. When she pulled away, he caught a glimpse of something shining in her eyes, like sunlight reflecting off water. "Take care of the shop," she said. "And you take care of the music," he replied. Haley smiled one last time, then turned toward the door. The small bell jingled as it closed behind her. The sound lingered in the air long after she was gone. Caleb looked around the workshop. The morning light touched every instrument, every surface, every piece of wood that had once been broken and made whole again. He walked to the bench, picked up the guitar they had built together, and strummed a quiet chord. The note was clear, strong, and alive. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Carry it beside me, kid." Outside, the city was waking up, cars on the road, children laughing, the hum of a new day beginning. Inside the workshop, Caleb Morgan stood surrounded by the music of his life, finally at peace with the sound of both silence and song. A few weeks passed. The rhythm of the workshop returned, steady and familiar, but something had changed. The air inside no longer carried only the smell of varnish and sawdust, it carried life. The guitars on the walls gleamed under the afternoon light, and the faint echo of Haley Brooks's laughter still seemed to linger between the wooden beams. Caleb Morgan worked quietly at his bench, shaping the neck of a new guitar. His movements were calm, patient, purposeful. The radio played softly in the background, tuned to a local country station. He rarely paid attention to it, until the announcer's voice caught his ear. And now, here is a rising songwriter whose heartfelt performance stole the show at last weekend's Knoxville Music Festival. This is Haley Brooks, with her original song, "Carry It Beside Me." Caleb froze, the chisel still in his hand. Then came the sound, the first gentle chords, the familiar rhythm. Her voice filled the air, tender and strong all at once. He built guitars for others to play, until she taught him to listen again. Every scar became a string, and every silence learned to sing. Caleb sat down, letting the words wash over him. He could hear the emotion in every note, the truth in every line. It was their story told not with regret, but with gratitude. He smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing as the melody rose and fell. When the song ended, the announcer added, "That was Carry It Beside Me, now climbing the charts here in Nashville." Haley Brooks dedicated this song to the man who reminded her that silence can still have a sound. Caleb set his tools aside and leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he simply listened to the soft hum of the radio and the quiet of his shop. He felt no sadness, only warmth, the kind that comes from knowing a story has found its ending. He stood and walked to the front of the workshop, opening the door to let in the afternoon breeze. The sunlight poured across the floor, catching on the golden body of Haley's restored guitar that still hung on the wall. A customer approached the door, a young man carrying an old instrument with a cracked bridge. He looked nervous, hopeful the same way Haley once had. "Are you Mr. Morgan?" the young man asked. "Someone told me you fix the kind of guitars that do not sing anymore." Caleb smiled gently. "That is what I try to do," he said. "Come in." As the young man stepped inside, Caleb took the guitar and examined it under the light. His fingers moved with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer feared what was broken. Outside, the city of Nashville buzzed with music street performers, studio recordings, open mic nights. Inside the small workshop, another story was beginning. Caleb placed the damaged guitar on his bench, then looked at the young man. "Tell me about the person who played this," he said. The young man smiled faintly. "It was my father's. He never had the money to fix it." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then let us give it a voice again." As he began his work, the light deepened, filling the room with gold. The same way it had on the day Haley first walked in. He could almost hear her voice again, soft, certain, full of hope. Even silence has a rhythm. Caleb smiled to himself and whispered, "Yes, it does." Outside, the afternoon turned into evening. Inside, a craftsman worked, the sound of his tools blending with the quiet strum of a guitar. The man who once lived in silence had found his peace not in fame or redemption, but in creation, in kindness, and in the music that never really left. Because some songs do not end, they simply find new hands to play them.